Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Friedman with Waterboats Bass, and everybody knows that we like to celebrate our Diamond Valley Lake bass fishermen. One way we do that is providing information to you. Today with me is Mike Giusti, and he has a unique perspective on the humble beginnings of Diamond Valley Lake. Mike, you were there in the beginning of this whole process. What was it like when you heard the first whispers of Diamond Valley Lake coming about?
Well, as a department employee, when we first heard about it was through the environmental review process, and that took years. But we really didn't know where the lake, what lake they were going to. They were looking at raising the dam at Paris. They were looking at another site, and then they finally selected what is now Diamond Valley. At that time, it was called the East Side Reservoir Project.
Okay, and when you say they were looking, who is that? Who were the key factors in building this program?
It's Metropolitan Water District of Southern California.
Oh, okay.
They fully funded this project as on their own as a an emergency water storage project. Basically, it's got a dual feature. It's to supply drinking water as well as having a 6-month emergency supply in the event of a drought or a natural disaster.
That's very cool. And where did you exactly fit into this process of Diamond Valley Lake?
Well, I really became involved in 1996 when the department, with me as a representative and our legal team, negotiated a contract to establish a fishery within Diamond Valley Lake.
Wow.
In the EIR, it was a condition that they allow public fishing and stuff like that. And since we were going to have to expend an enormous amount of time to create a fishery and monitor it to make sure it was successful, we felt it was appropriate to ask them to pay for it, which they agreed to.
So you got to develop the fishery at Diamond Valley Lake. I mean, what a dream job. What goes into that, and how did you start that process?
Well, when I started in, I think it was February or March of 1997. Keep in mind, the dams were still under construction. My office actually sat in what is now the bottom of the lake in an old 2-story ranch house. And basically what we wanted to do, I didn't want this to be a Metropolitan designed fishery or a fish and wildlife now fishery. I wanted this to be public input. Mm-hmm. I wanted the public to do this because I wanted to minimize the potential for introduction of species we didn't want. To be honest, I mean, bait bucket introductions is always an issue, but I was just trying to make sure I got as much input and public support for this project as possible. What kind of habitats do you want? What kind of fish do you want? What species, And
yeah.
So that's how I started this whole thing. I was required under our contract to prepare kind of a 2-phase plan. Phase 1 was what kind of habitat and maybe species composition, and then phase 2 was basically implementation and monitoring. So basically, starting in 97 and for the next 2 or 3 years, I went to the Fred Hall shows every year. I think both in Long Beach and
Del Mar.
Del Mar. Then I would go to every bass club I could go to, every fishing group I could go to. I mean, if somebody asked, I went. I interviewed, news media, whatever. And then while I was doing that, at the same time, I was developing a map of all the existing habitat, rock features, trees, whatever, that was in Diamond Valley Lake.
Wow, really cool.
And so ultimately, I ended up, if you've seen the 5-foot contour interval maps, those are maps that I prepared for Metropolitan that they printed and published.
Wow, very cool. And do you remember the overall consensus on what the habitat wanted to be introduced, or what the species were popular?
Well, everybody wanted it was your standard in terms of bass fishing, because this was going to be a bass fishery.
Okay.
So I mean, in addition, we did establish a trout fishery there, at least winter time, but the primary focus was it was going to be a warm water reservoir that was really deep. So we could hopefully get a 2-story fishery, and people wanted Florida strain, they wanted smallmouth, and they wanted spotted bass. Ultimately, it was decided that spotted bass were not necessarily the best thing to put into Diamond Valley Lake. Just because with the vertical nature of that reservoir, if we had a spotted bass fishery, it would most likely outcompete the Florida strain.
Wow, that's interesting.
And so people want big, I know bass anglers, they want big fish. I was one. So it's like, I want to catch the biggest fish I can. So that's what we focused on, was the largemouth and smallmouth fisheries. Bluegill, we got the southeastern bluegill, so we got the big bluegills in there, similar to what's in Paris. We put some red-eared sunfish in there. The shad, prickly sculpin, things like that came in on their own with the water when it finally did come in 2000. So
very cool. So in the beginning, you're drawing this whole thing up on paper. Do you remember the first day you got to fish it? And was that like a really weird feeling?
Yeah, well, I got to fish it multiple days, but the first time we went out and actually tried to catch fish was in, I want to say 2000.
Yeah.
The lake, I think, had just reached the east dam. Luckily, we took our electrofisher, which is really easy to launch. You don't need a launch ramp, so we launched it. And at that time, keep in mind, this was in, I want to say August. So the bass had spawned. Well, let's step back, because the first time I fished it was just unreal, because there was literally bass breaking the surface, chasing silver sides, and they would blow up an area the size of a football field.
Jesus.
And so we just took something that looked like a silver side and cast it out there, and it was almost every cast.
Yeah.
But you have to, before we even start that, you have to remember, and because one of the big misconceptions about Diamond Valley is that we started it with multiple rearing ponds and all this kind of stuff. We had one 80-acre pond that was dug in the bottom of the lake. They used it as a borrow site for core material for the East Dam, and so I used that. I fertilized it. They brought some water into it, so I had a constant water supply. I had an aeration system just to make sure that nothing bad happened to the fish that were in there. It was about 15 feet deep, and I stocked it with 1,500 southeastern bluegills, and then the original bass stock came out of Lake Hodges. It was 217 fish. That's all that's ever been stocked into Diamond Valley.
That's insane.
But prior to doing that stocking, we did a genetic analysis of the reservoirs in Southern California to get the purest Florida strain largemouth we could. And Hodges, even though upper Otay was pure, there wasn't an adequate number of fish there for us to be able to bring down to Diamond Valley. So it was a difference of, I think upper Otay is like 98% and these were 96%. So it's still, that's kind of the basis for what's created the fishery at Diamond Valley Lake, is those original 217 fish.
That's super interesting. Who does that study on the reservoirs, and like who's working together to figure out that percentage, the 98%, 96%?
We would go out and collect fin clips, and then we contracted, at that time it was Dr. Bernie May up at UC Davis to do the genetics, and not sure if he's still there. He may still be at Davis, but he's the one that did the work for us.
Wow,
and so we did all the LA, Santa Barbara, Ventura lakes, so Cachuma, Casitas, Castaic, Sandview, you name it, we did them all. And then we just had to make a choice as to where could we reasonably get fish and not hurt a fishery by moving them. We also did, as we do with everything in the department, we had those checked for diseases to make sure we weren't going to be introducing something that could affect the downstream reservoir. You have to remember, water that leaves Diamond Valley flows into Lake Skinner.
Yeah.
So I had to make sure I wasn't going to somehow hurt that fishery as well.
Very interesting. Do you remember any of the biggest problems when you guys started making this lake? I know there was a lot of animals found during construction, like the Mastodon. Did that have any problems?
No, it's really unique. You have to give Metropolitan credit.
Mm-hmm.
They went into this, when they decided where they were going to build it, they pre-mitigated most of their impacts. So they created the Santa Rosa Plateau, or contributed to that. The Shipley Reserve was another part of the mitigation. You got to keep in mind too, you're talking about building 3 dams.
Mm-hmm.
One that's 1.75 miles, I think, or one that's 2 miles. Mm-hmm. So you have an enormous work area.
Yeah.
So when they were doing the excavation, the archaeological, like the Mastodon and stuff, when they were found,
mm-hmm.
they would say, okay, they'd tell the archaeologists to come in, they would stake out the area, they would do whatever they had to do, and the equipment kept working because they had a work area that was big enough. You need this 100 square feet, so what? That's not going to bother us.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
Yeah, so it was, I give a lot of credit to Metropolitan. They went through this, were very cooperative. They helped me enormously when we did brush shelters or whatever. They actually paid people to do that. So they would bring in materials, whatever we needed for the department to do its job, they did.
Yeah.
So, and then, like I say, I remember after the reservoir was completed and full of water and stuff, they actually said they did not lose a day of construction time for biological or archaeological reasons.
That's very cool. Have you been back to the lake recently, or when was the last time you were there?
Well, I retired in 2017, so I was at the lake until I retired.
Yeah.
My office was just below the West Dam, so I haven't been back since, though. Since July of 17.
What do you think about it since 2017? How is it doing?
It's okay. I kid. Quinn Grandforce is the biologist that replaced me now, and he's doing the management of the lake with Metropolitan still. I always kid him that it was doing great until you showed up, because the first year he was there, we had a drought, and so the lake dropped like 100 feet. So the fishery crashed, but other than that, the fishery is doing real good. It's rebounded when we've had these natural environmental issues like these droughts. I mean, you got to remember, we had the one in 2008, and then we had one in 2015, I want to say, is when it went way down, went down like 110 feet, 115 feet. Which, it was bad to have those, but those are actually kind of good events as well, because it allowed Metropolitan to extend lawn traps so that the lake is usable almost to the maximum it could possibly be used.
Yeah.
So that was good. There's some issues that have come up since before I left, and they're dealing with them now. Is we're not sure how, but somehow flathead catfish got into the reservoir.
Wow, that's interesting.
And striped bass came in with the water. We kind of expected it. It came in a lot sooner than we thought. We found the first one in 2001, and then the populations have gone. But flathead catfish are tricky because they're a species that basically you need to fish with live fish or live bait and fish at night.
Yeah.
And since the reservoir is closed at night, that's not really an option. So I know Quinn's got an active program to try to remove as many as he can with the electrofisher, and he takes out a couple 1,000 pounds a year, and I don't know that it's making a dent, but we're trying.
Yeah.
And then the other issue, which I think kind of caught all of us a little bit by surprise, we knew the reservoir was going to form thermoclines during the summer. Every reservoir does that. Well, Diamond Valley forms a thermocline around 35, 40 feet, somewhere between 30 and 40 feet. And so all the fish are kind of squeezed into that upper 30 feet.
Yeah.
The problem is with that thermocline, the dissolved oxygen below it is basically zero,
Wow.
or at least it was. I don't know if it's changed much with the recent filling and stuff like that. That helps break it up, but so it's an issue that they're looking at, trying to figure out what we can do, if anything, to break up that thermocline or somehow oxygenate that water a little bit better. But being that it's a water district reservoir and they use it for drinking water, they also have to be very concerned about taste and odor issues with the algae that are in there, and so they can't necessarily circulate it like we would like, because then you kind of, there's these taste and odor producing algae, you end up getting the whole reservoir tasting kind of muddy, and then the public complains. So
Yeah.
it's they're working on it, but those are just issues that I think we didn't see. I don't think anybody could have forecast that they would be that prevalent in the reservoir.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for giving us all this background information. For someone like me, I had no idea all this went into Diamond Valley Lake. I'm a younger guy. I was there. The first time I was there, it was full. He was there before a drop of water was in it, and I just want to thank you for providing us insight on kind of what goes into a process like this. So thank you so much, Mike,
My
for
pleasure.
everything.
Anytime.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah.